Hello, my name is Oliver Hillel, and I'm a program officer in the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity based in Montreal, Canada. I'd like to thank the Government of Scotland, particularly the Directorate for Environment and Forestry and Energy and Climate Change, for the initiative of organizing this Edinburgh consultation as a web-based process. I'd also like to thank the United Kingdom, ICLEI, Regions for and the group of leading subnational governments for the Aichi biodiversity targets as co-organizers of this web consultation. And I'd like to share with you a few words from the perspective of the Convention on Biological Diversity. First, I'd like to share with you 4 ways in which the outcomes of the Edinburgh process can lead and contribute to the Convention. The first one is, of course, our post-2020 instrument, the Global Covenant for the next 10 years and beyond, which relates to all the Sustainable Development Goals. The current framework already includes a lot of options for the engagement of subnational and local governments in targets, for instance, 4, which relates to pollution, 5 and 7, which relate to wildlife and wild species. A lot of that has to do with urbanization. Target 8 on agriculture and other productive landscapes, 9 on water, and 10, which is about the health value of green space and has a specific chapter about cities. Clearly, mainstreaming, which goes from targets 12, 13, 14, 17, and 18, all of them involve multi-level governance, the cooperation between governments. Second, it's the second way in which this consultation can lead or help is that subnational and local issues have been incorporated into the long-term approach on mainstreaming and other parallel processes, such as, for instance, restoration, capacity building, and communications. We need to make sure that the point of view of subnational and local governments is considered also, for instance, on resource mobilization and monitoring by the use of the Singapore Index for Cities Biodiversity. The third process is that parties may consider a complementary decision under item 11, which is the item on mainstreaming, as the agenda proposed for the 3rd meeting of the subsidiary body on implementation, which is now scheduled from the 24th to the 29th of August in Montreal. So the idea is that all the lessons learned in implementing Decision 1022, which adopts a plan of action for the engagement of those level of governments, what are the lessons learned? How can we go and strengthen the post-2020 based on that decision through a specific decision for SBI 3? And the last mechanism is your personal contribution to the 15th conference of the parties, which is currently more or less rescheduled for the 1st or 2nd quarter of 2021, still in Kunming in China. So when that happens, there will not only be the conference, but there will be the 7th parallel summit of cities and subnational governments, which is hosted by the city of Kunming and by the province of Yunnan, along with the government of China. So we hope to see you in these 4 processes. Finally, I'd like just to leave, in the last week, we've been discussing a lot in the Secretariat, the issue, of course, of the COVID-19 crisis. And I'd like to think that the discussions we've had have a lot of impact on what the Edinburgh process will be discussing. So there's 3 aspects of this crisis which I would like you to consider. The first one, it's clear that this comes from the imbalances on the management of nature. We know the origin of pandemics, so we know this has to do with unsustainable contact with wildlife and domestic animals. So it's clear that nature cannot be ignored as we try to imagine what are the roots and what are the ways that we can avoid this crisis again. We have to factor nature into it. The second point is that we are seeing that it is exactly the level of local and subnational governance that is helping people a lot in these times. So it has become even more clear that the harmonization of policies, along the vertical mainstreaming axis is essential. We need to make sure that national, federal governments are saying the same things as subnational and local, as well as global, as in the UN. So this is another point that has become very clear and that might lead you to additional reflections. And the last one is that obviously the big opportunity will be the reinvestment, the restart of our economies after the COVID crisis. That's when we need to be the greenest possible. That's when we cannot afford to lose the opportunity to do things better. So it's a question of the repackaging of a reinvestment for post-COVID. With these thoughts, I'd like to leave you to consider the ways and means in which incorporating nature can help us build a stronger post-2020 global biodiversity framework. From the Secretariat, we thank you and we hope you can enjoy the webinar.